want to talk about how to receive the grace of God. Now, if you are a committed Christian and you're watching this or listening to it, you have received the grace of God. But by the grace of God, we can receive more of the fullness of that grace. Firstly, let's take our eyes off somebody else's problems for a moment. Remember what I said, if you've seen the message concerned, about when we go to the doctors. And sometimes we have to take items of clothing off in order for the doctor to be able to examine us to find out the truth about our condition. We expose ourselves to the doctor in order that the truth will happen. I vividly remember when my wife had a traumatized big toe, and she was hanging around in A&E for a long time, and finally brought through to a doctor, and the doctor did not expect that there'd be much of a problem. And when she took off the dressing on the big toe, which had been placed there by NHS walk-in, blood spurted out at quite a rate, and the doctor, suddenly having been confronted with the truth, had to take immediate action to stop the entire bench being covered in my wife's blood, and subsequently Sue had to have a minor operation. The truth had been revealed by taking away the layers. Now, the revealing of the truth, the revealing of the damage, the revealing of that which should not have been, was not a bad thing. We need to do this with God. So, the first thing to do is to make sure that we've shared what's there. It is my personal view, it's not a good idea to start with another human being. Sometimes another human being is very, very necessary to tease things out. And an unshared part of our life can be one over which the devil has a hold. I don't want any of us to be in that situation. Sometimes just unburdening ourselves can really, really help. And there's a whole stream of counselling based upon that sort of sharing, the listening that people need. But, you know, the reason we need that listening is often because we struggle for self-acceptance. And the reason we need to formalise it is because we need to find somebody else who is comfortable doing that. You know, if you're comfortable in your own skin because you've received grace and you're living in the truth, you'll find it easier to cope with where other people are. But it's easiest of all when you both believe that you're covered completely by that grace and that you're living in the truth. And the way to get there is to start on your own with the Lord. When you're on your own with the Lord, you need to take all your clothes off. I'm not talking about praying physically naked, I'm talking about praying spiritually naked. No pretense. Just get rid of the fancy words. Share about the intimate things, share about your feelings, share about the things that you don't think you ought to say to God. God's grace, remember, works with truth. You share the truth about the way that you perceive this world and yourself in relation to this world, and yourself in relation to your relationships, and yourself in relation to yourself. It could be anything. The folds of fat on your tummy. Your cat's illness. Your kid's driving you crazy and you don't think you're a good enough parent. You shout at other people too much. People have said things to you that hurt not because they were spiteful, but because they were correct. There can be 100 and 1,000 and millions of different reasons, can't there? And the way you feel about yourself when you look in the mirror, the way you feel about yourself when you start looking at others. And God's not going to compare you to other people, you know. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And God looks at the inside. He hears your concern about the outside. He hears your concern about the particular makeup that you have physically. And he understands this, of course. He understands everything. So that's quite a laboured way of saying there are no holds barred. There are no holds barred about those things which are actually sinful, because he sees all of that as well. The things that you know are wrong. What grates with God is when we try and justify them. So, if you're doing something which actually is wrong and you say, oh, well, God doesn't mind, that really grates with God. That's a very bad place to be. If you're doing something that's wrong and you don't know how to stop, God can handle that. You give it to God. Leave it there. Have that confidence that you've told him. Keep sharing about it. Not on the basis that you want things to carry on the way they are, but on the basis that you want to live in faith and victory. And you believe that that day will come. Expect to be the recipient of the grace of God, to cover the sin, so that you're not permanently guilty, because the blood of Christ is sufficient for all sin. But don't justify the sin. Don't say it doesn't matter. And don't feel that just by saying sorry you can go off and do it again with impunity. God knows our insides and he knows our motivation. There are no loopholes. There are no get-out clauses. Now, God's grace is sufficient for whatever we've done, however much we regret it, however horrible we think. And so that next component comes into play that you may well have heard of before, the need to forgive ourselves. Remembering that forgiving is also keeping no record of that wrong. Because we have to love our neighbours as ourselves, so if we don't love ourselves, it's difficult to love our neighbours. If we're going to love ourselves, then we have to apply 1 Corinthians 13 to ourselves and keep no record of wrongs. So we can't keep on beating ourselves up about stuff. Because Christ is not beating up us about stuff. He took the beating for us. We receive his grace. We receive his grace to be his people. It's very difficult to joyfully serve if you're already carrying a load of stuff. So we need to lay that load of stuff down. It's no use serving if we think we've got to be perfect before we serve, because then we'll never serve. If the devil cannot stop us from being a Christian. He has no such authority. He can persuade us into being something that Christ would not want us to be. So let's explore that next time.